Defense Solutions is engaged in 4 lines of business. Our defense and security products is where we got started, and we're the only supplier of main battle tanks to the Army of Iraq. We're also engaged on the commercial side in commodity trading, specifically foodstuffs and oil, and we've recently obtained a license opportunity to market scrap metal coming out of Iraq. Well, we've had a very busy 13 months. I went to Iraq in January of last year and stayed till July. During that time, I opened 2 offices for the firm in Baghdad, one in the international zone and one in the red zone, which is downtown Baghdad. And we engaged Iraqi staff to augment our American staff. And we began to develop our lines of business, first of all, around the defense and security items, and then in the other areas that we're now working in Iraq. I mention Iraq strongly because it is our primary focus of business development activities. Iraq is a country of 30 million people with 22% of the world's oil reserve, and they need everything. So we're focusing on our opportunities to supply foodstuffs to the Iraqi Ministry of Trade and also to broker the sale of crude oil and other oil products in and out of Iraq. Iraq is a huge opportunity, particularly for an American firm. American firms are especially highly regarded in Iraq because of the Iraqis recognize our technology as among the best in the world. But Iraq needs everything. The infrastructure in Iraq was destroyed. The agricultural sector has been destroyed. There's virtually no manufacturing whatsoever in Iraq today. So Iraq exports oil to pay for everything that it imports. It imports all of its foodstuffs, all of its clothing, all of its electronics, all of its heavy equipment, construction material, all of its military supplies, all of its security technology, imports everything. So anything that is manufactured, again, here in the United States or elsewhere, will find a home somewhere in Iraq. Well, first of all, in order to do business with the government of Iraq, you must be licensed by the government of Iraq. The Ministry of Trade has a process you go through. And we're virtually the only American company that has gone through that process. I'm sure there other companies have, but they are not obvious to us on the streets of Baghdad when I'm there, that the American companies that are in Iraq are primarily focused on U.S. government contracts where we've developed contacts, connections directly with the Iraqis. Our idea was that we wanted to be in Iraq when America went home. And so we created an office, again, in the red zone as well as the international, the green zone. The residence I have is at the Al Rashid Hotel, which is also home to many of Iraq's members of parliament and their government ministers. We're literally across the parking lot from parliament. And I see members of parliament and ministers at breakfast, at lunch, at dinner. They know me on site, and we've had an opportunity to develop this relationship both business-wise and personally, so that they often call on us to supply goods and materials that is not normally what we would be offering to the various ministries in Iraq. The American companies that are in Iraq have stuck with the familiar, and that is working with the U.S. government. The American companies that I see there have not invested the time, the effort, the energy, and the resources to develop the relationship with the Iraqis themselves. They've gone there to work for the U.S. government, the American companies have, and as the U.S. government is winding down its very substantial operations in Iraq and move into Afghanistan, the American companies are following them to Afghanistan. To do business in Iraq, you must invest in the operation. You have to know the Iraqi people. You have to understand the culture. You have to employ Iraqis who can translate for you and explain the nuances of the various business practices. It is a process that any company could do, but they have to be extremely patient and invest in the long term. The belief that this country of 30 million people with 22% of the world oil reserves, they need everything, but they don't buy just from anybody. They buy from people they trust, and it takes a long time to build that trust trusting relationship. Well, Defense Solutions was asked by the Iraqi Ministry of Trade several months ago if we could supply commodity foodstuffs. We were primarily focused on defense and oil brokering at the time, and we had not done any previous work in commodity foodstuffs. But we looked at it and saw that it was very, very similar to other brokering activities we'd already engaged in, so we gave it a try. So what we have on the table right now is a contract from the Iraqi Ministry of Trade for 100,000 metric tons of Brazilian sugar. And we also have a commercial company that has sought us out and also offered us a contract for another 100,000 metric tons of Brazilian sugar. So right now we have opportunities to supply 200,000 tons of sugar. That's 8 shiploads of sugar. That's a lot of sugar, and the value of these contracts is over $110 million. The work we're doing with the Ministry of Trade is very important to us. So Defense Solutions has expanded its staff slightly to accommodate other commodity foodstuffs. We have one now that we're trying to fill for an Iraqi company for 5,000 metric tons of European powdered milk. But there's also other things that we can do. We're representing 7 oil companies in Iraq to procure crude oil from the government of Iraq for these refineries. And we're also now engaged in the sale of scrap metal from Iraq. This is a very important question you asked about how America is perceived in Iraq. And I need to separate this into really 2 answers. The first is how the American military, the American government is perceived in Iraq. And the second is how American companies, American technology is perceived in Iraq. There's no question in my mind that the Iraqi people are ready to see American forces go home. But at the same time, they would like American technologies and American companies to stay. Best example I can give you is how the average Iraqi soldier views his counterpart, the American soldier. They look at the Americans with awe and amazement and terrific respect. Of course, our Army defeated their Army twice in the last 15 years. So, and American technology was largely credited with that, as well as the quality of our soldiers. So the Iraqi soldiers look at the American soldier, and they want to be just like the American soldiers. They want American technology, American training, American equipment. The same is true in the commercial side. The tenders that are issued by the government often specify a preference for American technologies. But what is missing is the American companies that have not gone through the very difficult process of becoming registered and doing business in Iraq are just not there promoting the American technologies. And that void is being filled by Asian companies and European companies. After all, this is a market that America created with the U.S.-led coalition since 2003, but America is not capitalizing on the opportunities in Iraq, and you can't capitalize on them without being there. Defense Solutions, the fact is Defense Solutions is in a very unique position. We went to Iraq not to chase after U.S. government contracts like every other American company that we've encountered. We went there with the idea of supplying equipment directly to the Iraqi people. We've gone through the licensing process. We've developed the relationship. We've endured, as other American companies have wearied of the process, but we've stayed. And as a consequence, the Iraqis are now coming to us in large number, asking us for a wide variety of products and services. And I think it just positions us in the ability to not only advocate for all American technology, but really to promote the 4 core businesses or 4 product lines that we have, and to be very successful at it. And the proof is the value of the contracts that we're being offered now.